want to tell you two stories to try to take back, and these are the kind of stories we need to fight back with. I, like our president, lived in Indonesia. I lived in Indonesia because I want to be like him. But I lived in Indonesia just like he did. It's a Muslim country. I never went to the madrasas. I just worked. But I mean, I was in Indonesia for a year in 1992-93 doing research. And I was in villages. And guess what I was researching? And I'm a conservative. I was researching infant mortality rates and how kids die. Even though I'm a right-winger and I hate all people, I was actually studying this. And you know what if you talk to people there, you know what you hear from them? Is they say, we desperately need health care. We desperately need health care. And they would talk about the American system of health care. How our American, even the poorest of the poor, live with a level of health care that is better than any level in the history of any nation ever. That's what happens. And I was all throughout Indonesia. It's a fascinating country. And they tell you that. They say desperately. And when I'd meet health care that was going on, guess who was doing it? American-educated Indonesians that came back and brought with them health care. Okay, so health care is, the rest of the world is watching. Another story which I like to tell because Colonel Jack Jackson's here, and I like to make fun of Colonel Jackson whenever I can because he's a Marine, and if he reaches me, he can beat me up and all. So, but my brother is a Marine, and my brother came to visit me when I was in Italy. And I was in Italy, and my brother, who's a Marine, is a little thick, and when he was going to cut a piece of bread, he cut his hand instead. And he came in, he had a big cut. I said, dude, you're supposed to cut the bread, not your hand. I mean, you know, a Navy guy wouldn't do that, an Army guy wouldn't do that, an Air Force guy wouldn't do that. And he said, if I go back and get the knife, I'm going to cut your head. And I said, well, let's move on. So he went to get health care in Italy, emergency health care. And he went down and he got 17 stitches. And he came out and I said, man, it looks pretty good. And he said, well, I think it's already infected. I said, why? And he said, well, it was kind of messy in there. It was kind of, this is an Italian emergency room. This is 10 years ago. And I said, well, you know, how did it feel? And he said, well, it didn't feel very good because they put the anesthesia in and they didn't wait for it to take and they just stitched it up. And so they said, and it was infected, it got infected, now he got it fixed and all. But the point is, the health care in other parts of the world, these are the stories we know. People come from Canada, they come from England, they come from Mexico for the health care we have. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. But as Ronald Reagan said, to paraphrase, we're not perfect. We just happen to have better than the rest of the world here. We happen to have a better system. Doesn't mean we can't make it better. Doesn't mean that we can't do better. But the left will tell you stories. They will tell you stories that are poll tested and designed to move you. They even are telling the story about healthcare cost savings. As Dr. Tobler said, you can't do what you're saying you're doing in terms of Obamacare and lower costs. It can't happen. But by the way, let's look at when government runs healthcare. There are three good examples. These, again, are the stories we need to tell. Medicaid, Medicare, and the VA system. Okay? All three are some of the most inefficient. Let's not talk about care for a minute. They're the most inefficient systems we've ever seen, ever. Ever. And ask your vets, ask the poor, your friends that are low income, ask seniors how the health care is going. Now, some of it is okay, some of it's pretty good, but it's inefficient, costly, and what most complaints you get from veterans, from the low-income people, and from seniors is over time they've lost control of the decision-making to say who gets to do what and how they can live their lives in terms of their health. And that's the fear we have to all be afraid of. So they're trying to give me the hook, but what I want to tell you is it is not enough to come together and feel like this is an important gathering. It is not enough. The only thing that we should do here today, and Carl's going to talk about this later, is leave with action steps to take. We have to tell our neighbors the true stories that counter what Katie Couric and Bill Moyer, two of the most impartial and wonderful people around, what they will tell. And if we can tell our stories to people, we can empower people. And then, as Carl said, action steps. Let our legislators know. Let our people know. I saw David MacArthur here. David MacArthur is a one-man wrecking crew on cap and trade. You don't know David MacArthur? And by the way, David MacArthur should be most famous. Where's Jack Jackson? Should be most famous because he has a son who's an enlisted Marine named Moose MacArthur, serving right now. I'm sure that's what David would tell you he's most famous for. But David MacArthur, you know what he did? He stepped up and he gave voice to his concerns on cap and trade and across America. I'm telling you, I got a call last night from D.C. They said, who is this MacArthur's baker? We're getting the stuff sent all over. So every time we can give voice and tell our stories, we can change the world, and we have to do it, because if we're silent, we're complicit. And the country's changing too fast. So thank you all for being here. Tell your stories and change the world one person at a time. Thanks.
Hey, Ed, I would tell you, Colonel Jackson came up to me and said he cut his finger yesterday. He want to talk to you. Where is David MacArthur? Right here. Hey! Folks, if you don't think, look, here's the deal. MacArthur Bakery's famous, has been famous around here forever. If you've ever had any of their stuff, you know why. But that guy and his brother and his small business have probably gotten more attention in the last 2-3 weeks than any small business in St. Louis area, and it's been nationwide, and it's the kind of story that has to get out because it's real, it's not made up. So thank you. I was in the legislature with Russ Carnahan, that's who it was. And so I'm glad to see that he hasn't changed, work ethic or otherwise. Anyway, Ed, thank you very much. That was great. Look, you know, Ed talks about going to, talk about Bill Moyers going to sick clinics and seeing sick people. 24thstate.com's got a great video up on his blog about the wait for health care, and I believe Georgia has a 10 to 11 day average wait to see a primary care physician under the current system. But you might know Massachusetts, within the last few years, went to an individual mandate, which is also being considered for the national health care. Now, average in Massachusetts is you have to wait 100 days to see a primary care physician. 100 days. Now in the video that's on 24state.com, it is actually better because it's in Boston where there are a lot of more doctors, and you only have to wait 50 days to see a doctor there. So there is some improvement.